Hey guys, welcome to episode 3 of the Evolving Game series. In this episode, we're going to give our character the ability to sprint, and we're going to have that sprint affect a stamina bar that will slowly drain. So let's jump right in. First, we are going to do a little bit of cleanup here. Let's create a new folder for our materials. We did create a couple materials in the last episode, so let's drag those. We will move this to the material folder, and I think we have another one under this mesh folder. Yes. All right, we'll right click here, fix up redirectors and folder, just to clean all that up. Okay, just a little bit of house cleaning. First, let's go over to blueprint folder. And the way we're going to do this stamina system is the same way we did the health system. We are going to create an actor component for our stamina system. So under blueprint folder, we're going to right click, go to blueprint class, choose actor component. We're going to call this AC stamina. Double click that. There's not a lot of code in this. There's a lot of variables to keep track of, but not a lot of code at all. So first, we are going to get rid of this event begin play and event tick. We will not need those. Let's create some variables. So for doing a stamina system, first we need to keep track of max stamina. I'm going to set this to a float. We are also going to need current stamina. Stamina drain amount. The stamina drain rate. And then of course we need variables for the regen side of that. So we need stamina regen amount, stamina regen rate. We will also need to keep track of if we are exhausted. And this needs to be a Boolean. So we're going to use this to keep track of if we have, basically if we have no stamina hits 0, we will hit an exhausted state. And in that exhausted state, for so many seconds, we are going to have to wait before our stamina starts regenning. You've probably seen it in video games where it's almost like a penalty if you let the stamina get all the way to 0, when you can just let go of your sprint button before you hit 0 and let it regen back quicker. We also, since we're keeping track of the exhausted state, we also need to know about how long we're going to stay exhausted. So we want to track the exhausted time. That needs to be a float. And then we also need to track if we are currently draining stamina. So is draining stamina, question mark, and that's going to be a Boolean. We'll compile. And we need to set some default values now for all of these. Max stamina set to 100. Current stamina, we're also going to start it at 100. Stamina drain amount, 1. Because we're going to take off 1 stamina per tick. And the drain rate will be the tick, basically. So we'll do this at 0.1. And then regen amount will be 2. Because we want it to regen twice as fast as it drains. And I'm just going to leave the rate at 1. Is exhausted by default. We're leaving unchecked. So that will be false. Exhausted time. Probably 3 to 5 seconds. Let's just do 5. We'll see if that feels too long. And then if we are draining stamina or not, we're going to leave that to false. So compile, save. Everything looks good as far as variables. I think I have everything covered. So we're just going to do a custom event here. So custom, you see custom event right there. And we're going to call this change stamina. So very similar to how we did health, we're just going to do how we did a health change, we're going to do a stamina change. So we need to do some checks first, right? So I'm going to hold down B, left click, and it'll give me a branch. First check is, are we exhausted, right? Because if our character is in the exhausted state, we don't want to do anything, right? We don't want to be able to drain or regen stamina at that point. So we'll do a check there, and we'll do a second check. That'll be on the false side, because if we are exhausted, we're just going to do nothing. If we're not exhausted, we want to check, are we draining stamina? So let's get the draining stamina. Set that to the condition. So if we are draining stamina, we're going to come up here and we're going to do all our code for draining stamina. If we are not draining stamina, we're going to do all our code down here for regening stamina. Let's do this. So if we are not, if we are draining stamina, let's set, oops, can't type today. Set current stamina. And then let's just do kind of the same thing. Well, let's just go with this first. All right. We know we need to get the current stamina. And we also need to get the stamina drain amount. Okay. And we are going to take our current stamina and we are going to subtract our amount. So we know that amount right now is set to 1, right? So it's just taking whatever our current stamina is, subtract it by 1. And then we want to clamp it, clamp float, because we're dealing with floats. And so that's going to be clamped at 0. We don't want stamina to go below 0. And max is, of course, going to be our max stamina. So that'll keep it within the values that we need it to be in, right? And then this is going to hit that. All right, so here's our calculation basically for draining stamina. Let's do another branch. Because now at this point, we're going to do a check and see if stamina has fully drained. So we want to see if our stamina amount that we're setting to, if that is equal to 0. If it is equal to 0, what we're going to do is set we're saying we have no stamina, so we're going to set our exhausted state, right? So if it is equal to 0, is exhausted, set to true. We need to do another thing here, but we'll skip it for now. I'm going to show you guys in a minute. And then let's do a delay. So I'm going to press D and left click. That's a quick way to bring up delays. And then we want to set our exhausted time here. And then after that time is over, which we currently have set to what, 5 seconds? Yep, 5 seconds. We are just going to highlight that, Control D to duplicate. We are going to set the exhausted state back to false. And then we are going to call change stamina, which is this. So basically that's saying we're draining stamina. If it hits 0, set to exhausted, wait out our exhausted time, set back to not being exhausted, and then change stamina. So we'll come down here, we'll hit change stamina. And now what we're hoping that'll happen is, because we're running this again after this, we're going to come down here and regen stamina. All right, let's finish this top part out right quick. So we've got the true side of the branch. So the false side, it's going to be very simple. We're going to do another delay here. Under the false, we are going to put our stamina drain rate right here. And then we are going to simply change stamina again. So basically how this works is, let's say we press shift to start sprinting. We're coming up to hit the change stamina event. This starts running. And when it gets to false, because we are not sitting at 0, it's going to do a delay, and then it's going to run it again. And it's going to happen so quick that you're going to see our stamina bar slowly going down as we are sprinting. And then when it hits that 0, it'll pop up here, set us to exhausted, wait out our exhausted time, and then jump back here. And then we'll likely come down here and hit the regen. So we start regening stamina. Now let's look at the regen side. So same thing, we're coming down here. We're going to do a set current stamina. And then now we need to do basically this. So we'll just highlight that, Control D, pop that in there. But since we are regenning, we need to change this from subtract to add. And then also here, we're not draining, we are regenning. So regen amount. Then over here, we are going to do, again, another branch. And we are going to check, oops, to see if our stamina is equal to what? This time, not 0, but max stamina, which means we have full health. So we want to know when we can stop regenning, right? If that is true, we do nothing, because at that point we're done. This is regened. We're done with the regen side of things, right? But if it's false, if it's not full, we have to come back and do this again. So then we were going to need to do another delay for the false side. And this is where our regen rate takes place, how quick we regen. And then of course we are going to run change stamina again. So the regen side is actually done. So let's comment this, regen stamina. Now there is something up here we need to add in. I didn't add it earlier because I just want to come over here and explain a little bit about it, but we're going to need some event dispatchers. We're not going to go too involved with event dispatchers in this lesson. This is just going to briefly touch on it. it'll show you, I guess, the basics, and then we can get way more involved with that later on when we start updating these systems to be more advanced. So for right now, we know what we want to do as far as dispatching. We need a dispatch right here because we want to say, okay, when we set this to exhausted, we want to do a dispatch that says, hey, we're exhausted. We also want to do a dispatch here that says we are no longer exhausted. So I'm going to do 2 dispatches. We're going to just call this one exhausted. And we're going to call the other one not exhausted. Compile. So we want to dispatch this event. We're going to drag it out. We're going to call. We're going to call this event right after we set our exhausted variable. So let's just fit this in here. Okay, and we actually are going to need another one right here. The not exhausted, call that event. Let me take a look at this and make sure it looks like we are good. And let's comment this and say drain stamina. Okay. So I think we're looking good here. So here is our code. So we'll go back over here. Let's open up our third person character. All right, we're gonna go to our event graph. Now, first thing we need to do with this character is give him a way to sprint, right? Let's add a control here. Let's go over to, let's do this. Go over to project settings. I already have a tab out here. If it's not there, just hit edit project settings. And we are going to go down here to inputs. So let's add, and what I'm going to do is click this. Actually, first, let's just call this sprint. And then the key, let's do left shift. I'm just going to click this and then press left shift. Automatically detects what button you pressed, so you don't have to search through the whole list of keys. So we have our left shift defined. Let's go back to our third person character. All right, let's come over here and we are just going to right click and then type in sprint. And there's our action event we just made. So now we're basically saying, hey, anytime left shift is pressed, number one, let's create a variable that is called is sprinting. And by default, we want it to be false. We're going to do a set. And let's just go ahead and call it again. So if we press shift, we're setting is sprinting to true. If we release shift, we're setting it to false. Let's add a branch. And we need to pull if we are exhausted here. We're checking for an exhaustion state. So what we need to do first is add our actor component here for stamina. Stamina. There's our actor component. Compile, save. Now we have stamina here. Oh, and let's go change this, right? Here's all the things that we're tracking. Right? Let's change this to stamina. Oops. Settings. And then we're going to drag each one of these into that grouping. Now, this isn't necessary. If you followed my last episode with making the health system, we did basically the same thing for the health settings. That way, over here in our character now, if we click on our stamina component, over here we have our stamina settings now, and we have all of those settings right here that we can access. Now, we can pull in our stamina, and we can now get the state of our is exhausted. And make that the condition. If we are exhausted, we're going to do nothing. But if we are not exhausted, we're going to start sprinting. And with that being said, we need to make a function for start sprinting. Start sprinting. All right, let's just go ahead and make another function too for stop sprinting. Okay, let's go back to our event graph, and we're just going to go ahead and hook these up right now. Start sprinting will trigger if we are not exhausted. And then right here, this will be stop sprinting. And I think this does it for our sprint mechanic. Okay. So there's our sprint mechanic as far as what we're going to put in the event graph. Now we need to fill these out with code, right? So if we try to play now, we're not going to actually sprint. Let's go to start sprinting. First thing we want to do is grab our character movement component and then set max walk speed. And when we're sprinting, what do we want our speed to be? Let's come over here and look. Character movement. We're going to search for max walk. There's our max walk speed. So we are sitting at 500 right now. I think I actually want that to be the sprint speed. Yeah, so this is basically our walk speed right now. I want that to be sprint, and then walk will be more of a walk. So let's change that. Let's go over here. Let's set this, let's have it. So 250. So that'll be our default speed. So let's see. Okay. So there's our walk. Which means we will set this when we start sprinting to 500. And then we want to get a reference to our actor component stamina. And we want to set is draining. To true. And then we want to call change stamina from that actor component. I think that should do it for start sprinting. So go back over here to event. We press shift. We set that, hey, we are sprinting. As long as we're not currently exhausted, we'll start sprinting. And then start sprinting sets our max walk speed to 500. We set our drain stamina boolean to true, and we access our change stamina. All right, let's look at stop sprinting. So stop sprinting, very similar, right? So honestly, exactly the same. So we will copy that, paste it. So we want to change this back to our default speed of walking. And then we want to set this to not true. And then we also want to call the change stamina, because at that point we still need to kick off whether or not we regen or not. So no matter if we're pressing shift or not pressing shift, we need to kick off this change stamina so the game can take care of either draining our stamina or regenning our stamina. All right, that looks good for that. Now I think, let's take a look. Yep, so here's walking. Hold down shift, there's sprinting. Let go of shift, there's walking. Okay. We don't see any representation of our stamina on the screen yet, but that is what we're going to do next. All right, let's open up. Is it open? No, let's go to our UI. So our widget blueprint for our HUD. We're basically going to do a bar just like this. So let's just make this a little easier. We will duplicate this bar, press F2 to rename, and call this stamina bar. So because we copied it, I think all our anchors and everything, yeah. So all our anchors and everything are already correct. Let's look at this. We were at 50 and negative 100. So let's go 50, negative 60. Yep, that looks about right. Then we are going to change this color to yellow. What else do we want to do? Oh, exhausted. So we need to add text. And let's just rename this to exhausted text. I cannot spell. Exhausted text. And where's that text at? Okay. So let's change its anchor position to bottom left. Size the content. And drag this down here. We're gonna have this pop up over the stamina bar when we are exhausted. Oh, we can line this up a little better. If we do the same as the other ones, right? Let's do 50 and negative 60. That puts that exactly there. What is our size? 330. Let's just do 300. Oh, take size the content off. 330. So that puts our text block same size as that down there. Let's do a color. Let's do a color change. Well, let's center it. And let's change the size to font. Change the size to 21. 22. 22 is fine. And change the color. Let's just also make that a pure yellow. I think that'll look right. Oh, of course we need to change the text to actually say exhausted. And then by default, we scroll down here to behavior where it says visibility. By default, we want this to be hidden. Let's see what we got here. So our bar looks fine in game. It's not doing anything yet because we don't have the code to have it all hooked up. And we don't see our exhausted text on it right now either. Perfect. All right, so first let's make a change that we did last time. So on the health bar, if we come over here to our graph, we look at our health bar here. We were doing a cast at this location. We're still going to do a cast, even though cast is not the most efficient way to do this. We will deal with interfaces later. If people are sitting here screaming, do an interface, you know, I know about them. We will do that later. It's not a big deal to do a cast on this right now. Interfaces really help you out later down the road when you have a bunch of things that you're casting and really linking a bunch of different blueprints up to each other. That's when it really benefits you. With today's PCs and how fast things move, it's not that big of a deal to have a few casts going, especially in the beginning of a project. So we'll go over to, let's go to the event graph here. We do not want pre-construct or event tick, but we are going to make a change here and say, okay, on event construct, let's get our player character. And we're basically just going to duplicate what we got here to be able to, instead of doing a cast, we're just going to get a reference to it right here is what we're going to do. So cast to BP third person character. So this event construct, what it means is when this blueprint widget is constructed in the game, do this. So as soon as it's constructed, do this. So we are going to, actually we can do this. Right click on this and just say promote to variable. And we are going to call this variable character ref. Now we know this is just a reference to our character. So now we have a variable we can put in place and call things. So what we can do here is get AC stamina. And then from this, we need to call that exhausted event. Remember the exhausted event in AC stamina? So we basically said, hey, when we set is exhausted, to just send an email out, right? See a little letter here, send a little text out, send a message out that we are exhausted. Okay. So here, I'm just going to type exhausted. And up here in this, you can see bind event to exhausted. This will allow us to run an event off of this. Well, let's go ahead and we need to call the other one too, right? So the other one was not exhausted. So bind event to not exhausted. Put that here. Okay, now off of these, we can do something, right? So we can just drag off here and do a custom event. Oops. And we will call this, let's just call it exhausted. And then here, same thing, custom event. We will just call it not exhausted. Okay, and then we're going to do some code in here for the visibility of, let's go back over to designer. This text here, we want to change whether it's visible or not. So first, we're going to come up here to exhausted text and we're going to make it a variable. Hit compile, come back over here to graph. Now you can see listed here under variable, we have a reference to that exhausted text. So now we can drag that exhausted text in, say get And then we can pull off this and say set visibility. So when we are exhausted, we want this to be visible. Let's duplicate that. Reference to there. When we are not exhausted, we want it to be hidden. So that'll just control basically over here whether or not this is setting when we're exhausted or not. And then it's doing a message out on both these that says, hey, when you get this message, run this. When you get this message, run this. And that's just how we're toggling on the exhausted text off and on. Now, since we changed this here to get our reference for our character, now we can go under, let's go under our get health % function here. We can get rid of this. And now we can just pull in our character reference. Tie that to AC health. Clean this up a little bit. That's all we need for our health. Now we need to do the stamina bar. So let's go back over to designer. Click on our stamina bar. And we're going to come up to %, create a binding. Just going to get rid of that. And this is basically what we just did for stamina, right? Basically the same setup. We get our character reference. We get AC stamina. From that, we grab our current stamina, and we also grab our max stamina. We divide and then pop that in our return value. Okay, so that looks good for keeping track of our stamina bar. I think we're good. Let's test. So let's test the health here. We're still losing health if we walk in that. We're still gaining health, so you can see the change I made for the reference. It didn't affect the health any. Now stamina, look at that. Stamina bar is draining. And if I let go, we go back to walking, and stamina regens, and it's regenning twice as fast as it drains. And I'm just going to keep it held down here. All right, so I do see one thing that I did not add. I forgot to make it stop us from sprinting when we ran out. So we do see the exhausted state. Okay. Now you notice how that worked, right? So, well, there's an issue there that we probably won't deal with today, but so we're exhausted. And after 5 seconds, we leave the exhausted state, and now we are regenerating stamina. But what we are not doing is we're not stopping our sprint. Yeah, so see, we can still sprint. So nothing's keeping us from. Now, if we let go, let's see. Yeah, if we let go, then press it again, we're not able to trigger sprint again while we're exhausted, but it's not popping us out of the sprint state. So to fix that issue is going to be under our third person character and under our begin play. We want to take advantage of that event dispatch that we are calling over here. So when we send out this notification that we are exhausted, we want to be able to see that in our third person character too. We're grabbing it from our HUD and making changes to the text but we're not doing anything here about being exhausted to stop our sprinting when that happens. So what we need to do under event begin play is we first need to bind that event to a custom event. So let's grab a reference from our stamina component. We'll bind event to exhausted. And then create a custom event called exhausted. And then we will just stop sprinting. So all that's going to do is when that message gets sent out that we are exhausted, anything that's bound to this event dispatcher can run something when that event gets sent out. So that event gets sent out and says, hey, we're exhausted. Well, the UI sees it and says, gotcha, let's turn on the exhausted text. When our third person character sees it, it's going to say, okay, you're exhausted, so we need to stop sprinting. And stop sprinting does this, changes our max walk speed back to walk, sets that we're not draining stamina, and then we run our stamina event just so stamina will start regenning. So let's test that out. So here we are in our game. We are walking. We are now sprinting. We're taking damage. We're healing. If we stop, it regens. We press it back. It's going down now. And when we hit our exhausted state, yep, we are walking. I still have sprint held down right now. Can't sprint. Now that we're not exhausted, I can sprint, but we're exhausted immediately because I didn't let it regen enough. There we go. So we have the basics of that working. Now there's a couple little things that aren't perfect, right? So if I keep holding if I keep holding the sprint key down right now, I'm not going to sprint again until I pick up and let go of shift and then press it again. Also, if we're standing completely still and I press left shift, we're going to start draining stamina. So if this is something that you want to fix in your game, go for it. We will probably fix it later down the road when we start making the systems more and more advanced. There's several different ways we could accomplish this, and some of it gets a little crazy. We will down the road explore the event dispatchers a lot more, and we'll also explore interfaces, which will actually help with a lot of this, being able to call states and put our character in different states and have different things happen depending on the state we're in. Again, this is the first videos in this series. We're just going to keep it very basic right now. And that's going to do it for this video. If you guys liked it, please throw a like, leave some comments on what you'd like to see in the next videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.